Two cities glow under the same flag. In one, Ferraris idle on clean boulevards. In another, wolves walk the streets at night. Same country. How do you build a life across a gap that wide? There is a city in Russia where, in the late 1980s, more than 200,000 people came to work. Today, the wolves have it almost to themselves. And it flies the same flag as Moscow, where a one-bedroom apartment can cost more than most Russians earn in a month. This is the strange thing about the largest country on Earth. It is not one place. It is 100 places wearing one name, stretched across 11 time zones, covering an eighth of the planet's inhabited land. And the distance between its brightest corner and its most forgotten one is the real story here. Not the beauty, the gap. So let's start where everyone starts, the capital. Moscow sits in the milder west of the country, closer to Belarus than to Siberia, which is why its winters settle around -10 degrees Celsius, about 14 Fahrenheit, instead of the brutal cold further north. On the map it looks small, just over 2,500 square kilometers, roughly 1,000 square miles. But nearly 19 million people are packed into that space, and they've been the center of Russian power for more than 850 years. You feel that history in the skyline, in the Kremlin walls, in red squares swept so clean you could eat off the cobblestones, in the bright onion domes of St. Basil's Cathedral, standing where they have stood for centuries. This is the official heart of the country, the courts, the government, the residence of the president, and luxury cars with sirens still part the traffic to remind you of it. Here is what surprises people who actually go. They expect a grey, tense place. They find the opposite. Americans who have lived there describe the same thing again and again, the shock of how safe the streets feel late at night. No litter rolling underfoot, no soda cans in the gutter. People sitting on benches past midnight, sharing food, taking photographs of each other on every corner. The news shows you one Moscow. Visitors come home describing another. The honest answer is that both are real, and a city this size holds room for both at once. There is even a small industry built on that vanity. Walk through the center, and you will find photographers carrying professional cameras, offering paid portraits to passers-by, some of them hauling full backdrops into the busiest squares. They rarely need them. Every corner of this city, the parks, the river, the architecture that borrows freely from Western Europe, already frames a picture. And in the evenings, the sidewalks fill until there is barely an empty stretch of pavement. People who cannot get a table simply park a car, open the trunk, and turn it into a place to sit, sometimes with a hookah going right there on the curb. The energy is closer to a Western European capital than to anything the Cold War taught you to expect. Street musicians play on nearly every corner, so there is almost always a melody somewhere in the air. There is one absence you notice though. Hardly anyone looks over 50 on the streets. The older generation is there, mostly down in the metro, mostly out of the way. A small first hint of a pattern this whole video is building toward. Money is where the myths get loud, so let's be precise. You will hear that you need $4,000 or $5,000 a month to live in Moscow. Russians who actually live there push back hard on that, and the numbers are on their side. The average salary in Moscow in 2026 runs around 124 to 150,000 rubles a month, roughly $1,500 to $1,900. A one-bedroom in the center rents for 60 to 100,000 rubles, somewhere near $750 to $1,200. Inflation has cooled to about 5%. It is not a cheap city, and to live the luxurious version of it, you really would need a high income. But to simply exist here, you do not need an oligarch's wallet, and saying otherwise is the kind of exaggeration locals catch instantly. They catch other things too. The Moscow Metro is often called one of the most beautiful transit systems in the world, and it earns it. Stations built like Soviet palaces, chandeliers underground, marble that has outlasted the country that laid it. 306 stations carry the city now, not the smaller number you sometimes hear quoted. Get one fact like that wrong, and a Russian in the comments will correct you and then doubt everything else you said. So we will try not to. Above ground, the wealth is louder. Whole streets, Malaya Brnaya, Petrovka, belong to the elite, where Ferraris and Lamborghinis appear at dusk like they were summoned, and the luxury boutiques charge what you would expect. This is the Moscow the headlines love, the playground of oligarchs and official cars. And right beside it, ordinary couples get married in quiet ceremonies by the river, small gatherings of close family rather than the spectacle you might imagine. Wealth and modesty share the same blocks. That is the texture of the place. Not one Moscow stacked on top of another, but both braided together so tightly, you stop trying to separate them. The polished surface of Moscow answers a lot of questions, but it raises one the city would rather you didn't ask. Look closely at who is on those streets. Watch the crowds in any Russian city and a pattern appears. The women are everywhere, at work, in cafes, running things. And there is a long, tired tradition of foreign videos, reducing that to one word, beauty, and stopping there. We are going to skip the staring, because the real story about Russian women is not their faces, it is their lives. Literacy among Russian women runs above 90%. They work across every sector, including the trades long treated as men's work, and they carry an unusual share of the country's professional and social weight. They do not shrink their ambitions to fit a gender role. Engineers, doctors, drivers, managers, scientists. The line between men's work and women's work is thinner here than the stereotype suggests, and it has been for generations. That is not an accident of culture alone. It connects to something structural, something we will come back to in a few minutes, a question half the comments on videos like this keep asking, and almost no one answers. Hold that thought. For now, notice the confidence. The way people here carry themselves, dress with care for an ordinary Tuesday, move through public space like it belongs to them. Orthodox Christianity is the dominant faith, but neither church nor state seems to press down on how people live or dress. People move freely. They express themselves how they like. Life spills outdoors, music on the corners, conversations on the riverbank that run long past dark. That confidence has a shadow, and we'll get to it. But first, the other crown of Russia, a city the world used to cross oceans to see. St. Petersburg sits in the far northwest, 6 million people, close enough to Finland that, with the right papers, you can be in the European Union within a couple of hours. Unlike Moscow, it opens onto the sea, the Gulf of Finland feeding into the Baltic, which changes everything, adding beaches, coastline, sea air after work. A whole second register of life the capital simply does not have. Peter the Great founded it in 1703 on a swan, of all things, because he had travelled through Europe, fallen for Venice, and decided Russia would have its own gateway to the west. So he gave it canals, 42 islands, nearly 500 bridges. They call it the Venice of the North, and for once the nickname undersells the place. Then there is the light. For a stretch of weeks from late spring into summer, the sun here barely sets. 19 hours of daylight. The sun rises near 3 in the morning and slips down around 11 at night, and even then the sky never fully darkens. St. Petersburg sits closer to the Arctic Circle than almost any other major city, which is why the effect is stronger here than in Sweden or Norway, and why the city simply stops sleeping. Festivals, music, people drifting along the canals at 2 in the morning under a sky the color of dawn. They call them the White Nights, and before the war millions came every year just to stand in that strange bright darkness and watch stars appear in a sky that refused to go black. This is the Russia the brochures sell, the Russia the world paid to see. But the same flag flies over places the brochures forget, and we are getting closer to them. The city holds darker memory too. During the Second World War, when it was called Leningrad, it was encircled and starved. You will often hear it called the 900-day siege. The exact figure is 872 days, rounded up over the years, but the truth is heavy enough without rounding. The city held, it did not fall. It kept the name Leningrad through the entire Soviet era, until 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved and the old imperial name returned. This is not just another Russian city. It is one of the few places on Earth where 2 centuries of empire and 1 century of Soviet rule are stacked visibly on the same streets. What St. Petersburg does best is remember. It is a museum of itself, the Hermitage, one of the largest art collections on Earth, the Kazan Cathedral, hundreds of galleries, a whole city treated as something worth preserving. Walk Nevsky Prospect, the city's main artery, and you will not find a single piece of litter. Education runs deep here, and literacy among women, again, climbs past 90%. The buildings stretch in pale whites and browns down avenues that feel almost cinematic. This is the shining half of the story, and it is genuinely beautiful. So here is the turn. 2 cities, 1 flag. But that same flag flies over a Russia almost no traveler ever sees. And that is where the country stops being a postcard and starts telling the truth. Zoom out on the map, and Russia keeps going long after the famous city's end. 17 million square kilometers, larger than Antarctica, nearly twice the size of China. And scattered across it are republics and towns that are quietly fading, places the postcards skip. Start with Karelia, just east of Finland, where colorful wooden houses line the roads and the architecture borrows from across the border. People here pick blueberries in the forest instead of buying them. A kilogram would cost about $1.30 in a shop, so nobody bothers. On Kiji Island, wooden churches built without a single nail still stand, preserved by sheer isolation. It is calm. It is also emptying. Then there is Tuva, in the south above Mongolia, a republic of Turkic people that scientists place at the exact geographic center of Asia and that the rest of the country seems to forget exists. The roads go unpaved, so the lightest wind raises dust storms that swallow whole streets. Cold smoke hangs grey over the capital. Out on the open steppe, a quarter of the population still herds cattle and sheep the way their ancestors did, living by a calendar the modern world never reached. The republic sits at the heart of the continent and at the edge of the country's attention at the same time. Travel east all the way to the Pacific edge and you reach Sakhalin, Russia's largest island, a place where Russian and Japanese histories overlap. Japan controlled the south of it between 1905 and 1945, until the end of the war shifted the border, and the 2 countries still dispute islands nearby. It sits in one of the most seismically active zones on the planet, abandoned lighthouses that have been taken over entirely by birds, the structures handed back to the wild. A pattern is forming across all these places: the cold, the distance, the slow retreat of people, and the quiet return of nature. And as you move through them, you start to notice something about who is left behind and who isn't. So let's finally answer the question the comments keep asking. Where are the men? The arithmetic is stark. Russia has about 66 million men and about 77 million women. That is more than 10 million more women than men, one of the largest such gaps in the world. And the reason matters more than the number, because the number alone gets misread. It is not that young men are missing. Among people under 30, the sexes are roughly balanced. The gap opens later, and it opens brutally. By ages 70 to 79, women outnumber men 2 to 1. By the 80s, 3 to 1. Among those who reach 100, 5 to 1. The cause is a life expectancy gap of nearly 12 years, around 67 for men, 79 for women, driven by heart disease, alcohol, accident, the slow arithmetic of men dying early. Layer on top of that the cumulative loss of war, from the 27 million Soviet dead of the last World War to the toll of more recent ones, plus the men who have left to avoid being called up. No single cause explains it. Together they bend the whole shape of the country. Russia does not run short of young men. It loses its men early. This is the shadow behind that confidence we noticed earlier. When a society loses men this steadily, women do not just outnumber men in a chart. They hold the country up in the workplaces, the universities, the households where someone has to earn and someone has to stay. It reframes everything we saw in those cities. The women running things in Moscow and St. Petersburg are not a lifestyle a video can shrink to a thumbnail. They are what a country looks like when it has been quietly short of men for the better part of a century. The beauty the other videos fixate on was never the story. This is, and the quiet part is how invisible it stays. Bright crowds in bright cities, carrying a weight the camera never names. Geography does not only decide who lives here, sometimes it decides whether a city lives at all. North of the Arctic Circle, where the sky stays grey for half the year, there is a city called Vorkuta. It is so isolated that getting there from Moscow still takes around 45 hours by train, nearly 2 days without a break, on a railway that was itself built by prison labour, because there is no reliable road in, and the airport rarely beats the weather. To understand the place, you have to follow a chain, because the cold is only the ending. It begins with the Gulag. Founded under Lenin, expanded savagely under Stalin through the 1930s and 50s, Vorkuta was a place of exile and forced labor, where political prisoners and ordinary citizens who criticized the regime were sent to dig coal in conditions that killed on a scale measured in the millions. The railway, the mines, the first foundations of the town, all of it was laid by people sent here as punishment. Then Stalin died, the camps closed, and the state tried to turn the place into a real city. 13 mines, apartment blocks, housing bonuses to lure workers north into one of the harshest climates a person can survive. For a while it worked. Vorkuta became a genuine industrial hub, shipping coal across Russia and out to the world, in an era when coal heated homes and ran the machinery of the 20th century. Then the chain turned, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the world stopped needing coal the way it had, shifting toward the oil and gas coming out of places like Qatar and Kuwait. The mines that built the city became the thing the city could not survive losing. They closed, one by one. The small businesses that fed the miners closed after them, and the people followed the work out. The numbers tell the rest. In the late 1980s, Vorkuta and its district held more than 200,000 people. Today it is down near 44,000 and still falling, almost 3% a year. Only 4 of the 13 mines remain, and the satellite town of Komsomolsky tells the whole story in miniature. 20,000 people once lived there. Now about 200 remain. The rest is snow and silence and apartment blocks with the heating still running in the few occupied units, while the empty ones freeze solid. Walk through what's left and it stops feeling like a city. Furniture still sits in abandoned flats, books on shelves, unopened bottles, medicine left in cabinets, as if the residents stepped out and never came back. Soviet traffic lights still cycle through red and green for cars that no longer come. Statues of old leaders still stand where they were planted. The whole place frozen at the moment. The country that built it walked away. And in the long dark, the most common sound on some streets is the howl of wolves moving through them. After nightfall, you cannot see 20 meters, about 60 feet, and the thought that something could come out of that dark is not paranoia. This is no longer a place shaped by people. It is a place the wild is quietly taking back. Weeds pushing through the ruins, the tundra closing over the streets. Reporters who visit call it a drawn-out death, the largest city of its kind above the Arctic Circle, slowly disappearing. And yet, hold that word, valuable, because we are coming back to it. Would you take a high-paying job to live in a city the wolves are reclaiming? Tell me below. And if you want the full picture most channels skip, the part past the postcards, this is the kind of place we go. Vorkuta is not alone. Across the Far East, the cold writes the same story in different words. On the coast of the Sea of Okhotsk sits Magadan, another center of Stalin's camps. Another 100,000 people living among hundreds of abandoned buildings, white for most of the year. It is so cold here that people store food on the outside of their windowsills. The city itself is the refrigerator, and that points to the deeper truth about this whole country. Russia is a place where geography refuses to be normal, and people simply learn to live by its rules instead of theirs. Consider Omyakan, the coldest permanently inhabited place on the planet, where roughly 500 people live through average winters of -50 Celsius, about -58 Fahrenheit, and where the thermometers touch figures near -71, some 96 below zero in Fahrenheit. A whole way of life built around the assumption that the cold will never break. Ground too frozen to bury the dead easily. Engines left running through the night because a stopped engine may not start again. And here is the quiet twist that will matter at the end. In recent summers, even Oymyakon has logged record heat. The coldest inhabited spot on Earth is warming too. Keep that in your pocket. We are almost there. Not every hard place is frozen though. Some are just forgotten in concrete. Between the postcard cities and the Arctic ruins lies the Russia most Russians actually live in. Take Kudrovo, near St. Petersburg, towers of the tallest residential concrete in the country. One complex holding something like 3,700 apartments, built cheap for people who work in the city but cannot afford to live in it. From above, the people between the blocks look like ants. Or Krasnodar in the south, a city of 700,000, where the soft ground turns to swamp in heavy rain and underbuilt streets turn to mud. This is not the glittering capital, and it is not the frozen edge. It is the vast in-between. And it is the half the comments keep asking for, the part that isn't the rich, the posh, the polished. If you only show one Russia, you have shown a facade. So let's not. Which raises the obvious question. What is life here actually like in 2026, past both the Ferraris and the ruins? The honest answer is mixed, and honesty is the point. Inflation has eased to around 5%, down from a much sharper spike a couple of years ago. But everyday life in the cities has gotten harder, and the war has changed things. Tighter control online, a sense of pressure that wasn't there before. None of that cancels the safety and the cleanliness people genuinely praise. Both are true at the same time. That is the whole lesson of this country. And one more thing the cameras tend to miss. Moscow is not the single-shade Slavic city those videos imply. It holds large communities from Central Asia, from the Caucasus, Tatars who have been Russian citizens for generations, students from across the world, including Africa. People keep asking why they don't see that diversity on screen. The answer is mostly that the camera was pointed somewhere else, which is its own kind of facade. The news shows you one Russia. The tourists show you another. The truth, as usual, is both. Which brings us back to where we started. One flag, two worlds. And a question about the ground itself.